They laughed first. Not the friendly kind of laughter either. The sharp, dismissive kind that comes with head shakes and whispered certainty. The kind that says, "This won't last." When Elias told people he was leaving the city to build a cabin alone in the mountains, the reaction was almost predictable. Some smiled politely. Some offered half-hearted warnings. Others didn't even bother hiding their mockery. A man with no construction crew, no inherited land, no big budget, and no backup plan, heading into the mountains with nothing but tools, books, and a stubborn idea. To them, it sounded like the opening line of a failure story. What they didn't know was that Elias had already failed many times before, and survived every single one. The first micro-hook of his story wasn't the cabin. It was the silence. The kind of silence you only notice when the noise finally stops. Years earlier, Elias had been drowning in sound, traffic outside his apartment, notifications buzzing on his phone, conversations that went nowhere, meetings that solved nothing. His life looked successful on paper, but inside, everything felt thin and hollow. One night, after another long day that blurred into the next, he caught his reflection in a dark window and barely recognized the man staring back. That was the moment something snapped, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, like a decision finally settling into place. He didn't announce his plan at first. He researched. He learned. He watched videos late into the night about woodworking, insulation, foundations, weatherproofing. He read old manuals and modern guides, learned how to read land, how to respect it. The idea of the cabin grew slowly, like a seed under snow. By the time he finally spoke it out loud, it was already real to him. Real enough that the laughter didn't stop him. It only clarified who believed in him, and who never had. When he arrived at the mountain site for the first time, the land didn't look heroic. It was rough, uneven, stubborn. Rocks jutted out of the ground like they were daring him to try. Trees stood tall and indifferent. The wind cut through his jacket as if testing his resolve. He stood there alone, boots sinking slightly into damp soil, and for the first time since leaving the city, doubt crept in. Not the loud kind that panics you, but the quiet kind that asks, "Are you sure you're enough for this?" That question followed him every day, at first. The early weeks were brutal. Elias woke before sunrise, his breath visible in the cold air, hands already sore from the previous day. He mismeasured boards. He cut angles wrong. He dropped tools, tripped over roots, and learned the hard way that the mountain didn't care about motivation speeches. Some nights he collapsed into his tent, muscles shaking, wondering if everyone else had been right. Those were the nights when the mockery replayed in his head, clearer than any memory of encouragement. "You'll quit. You'll come back. This isn't realistic." But here's the thing about being alone. There's no audience for quitting. No one to see it. No one to impress either. And that changes the math entirely. Elias learned to break the work down into small, almost unimpressive victories. One straight post set firmly into the ground. One wall frame standing without wobble. One day without injury. These micro-wins didn't look like success from the outside, but they stacked up quietly. Each one rewired something inside him. He stopped asking if he was enough, and started asking what the next step was. The mountain didn't need him to be fearless. It needed him to be present. Weather became his harshest teacher. Rain turned soil into mud, slowed progress, soaked through gloves and jackets. Wind howled through the trees at night, rattling his tent and his nerves. Once, a sudden storm forced him to spend hours reinforcing a half-finished structure just to keep it from collapsing. His hands bled. His back screamed. And still, when the storm passed and the frame was standing, something changed in his posture. He stood a little taller. Not because it looked good, but because he'd held his ground. Weeks turned into months. The cabin began to take shape in ways even Elias hadn't fully imagined. Walls rose. A roof followed. The space transformed from an idea into shelter. He carved a window opening by hand, carefully, knowing this would be the place light entered every morning. That window mattered to him more than any design feature. It was proof that the inside of the cabin would never be completely closed off from the world. Solitude didn't mean isolation. It meant choosing what, and who, came in. Word spread slowly. Photos posted online showed progress people hadn't expected. The tone of comments shifted from jokes to surprise, from doubt to curiosity. Some of the same people who had mocked him now asked questions. How did he learn? Was it hard? Didn't he get lonely? Elias didn't rush to answer. He was too busy learning something deeper, that loneliness and solitude are not the same thing. Loneliness drains you. Solitude refills you, if you're honest enough to sit with yourself. There were setbacks. One miscalculation in load distribution forced him to redo part of the roof. Another time, a tool broke at the worst possible moment, costing him days. Each setback carried a familiar temptation, the idea that failure meant stopping. But Elias had learned something crucial by then. Failure wasn't a verdict. It was feedback. The mountain wasn't rejecting him. It was training him. As winter approached, urgency crept into his work. Cold nights grew colder. Snow dusted the ground like a warning. He worked longer hours, not out of panic, but focus. Every nail driven felt deliberate. Every joint sealed mattered. The cabin no longer represented escape. It represented commitment. To finish this wasn't just about shelter. It was about seeing something through when quitting would be easier. The first night he slept inside the cabin, the silence returned. But this time, it was different. It wasn't empty. It was full. The walls held the warmth of his effort. The roof muted the wind. The small stove crackled softly, its glow dancing across wood he had cut, shaped, and placed himself. Elias sat on the floor, back against the wall, and let the weight of it sink in. He hadn't just built a cabin. He'd built proof. Winter tested that proof relentlessly. Snow piled high against the door. Supplies ran low, faster than expected. There were days when he barely stepped outside, conserving energy, listening to the storm roar like an animal circling. Those were the hardest moments psychologically. Isolation strips away distractions. It forces you to confront your own thoughts without filters. Elias learned to sit with discomfort instead of running from it. He wrote. He planned. He rested without guilt. The cabin wasn't just protecting him from the cold. It was reshaping how he related to time, effort, and himself. When spring finally arrived, it felt earned. The snow melted slowly, revealing land that looked changed, because it was. So was Elias. His movements were more confident. His decisions clearer. When visitors eventually made the trip up the mountain, their reactions were quiet at first. They walked through the cabin slowly, running hands over beams, looking out the window Elias loved. No one laughed. No one doubted. Some apologized without words. Others simply nodded, as if acknowledging something bigger than wood and nails. The people who had mocked him the loudest were often the ones most unsettled by his success. Not because he'd proven them wrong, but because he'd proven something uncomfortable true. That ordinary people, without shortcuts or applause, can do extraordinary things if they're willing to be misunderstood for a while. Elias never lectured them. He didn't need to. The cabin did the talking. Over time, the mountain cabin became a reference point. Not a tourist spot. Not a flex. A reminder. When Elias returned to the city occasionally, he noticed how small certain problems felt now. Deadlines, arguments, noise. They no longer owned him. He'd face storms that didn't care about excuses. He'd learned patience from trees that took decades to grow. Perspective is a powerful byproduct of doing hard things on purpose. Here's the part most people miss. The real victory wasn't the finished cabin. It was who Elias became while building it. The discipline that replaced self-doubt, the resilience forged through repetition, the quiet confidence that doesn't need validation. Anyone can celebrate a finished result. Very few are willing to endure the long, unglamorous middle where progress is invisible and criticism is loud. They mocked him for building a cabin alone in the mountains. They were wrong, but not just about the cabin. They were wrong about what's possible when someone stops trying to look impressive and starts trying to be consistent. When someone trades comfort for competence. When someone understands that proving others wrong is temporary, but proving yourself right changes everything. The cabin still stands. Weathered now. Stronger for it. Just like the man who built it. The story didn't end when the cabin stood complete. In many ways, that was only the midpoint. The visible milestone that hid the deeper transformation underneath. After the first full year in the mountains, Elias noticed something subtle but undeniable. His internal clock had changed. He woke before dawn without alarms. He worked until the light told him to stop. Hunger, fatigue, focus, everything aligned with reality instead of schedules invented by glowing screens. Time stopped feeling like an enemy chasing him and started feeling like a resource he could shape. That alone was worth more than anything he'd left behind. People assume solitude means stagnation. They imagine long, empty days and shrinking ambition. What actually happened was the opposite. With no one watching, Elias experimented. He improved the cabin, reinforced beams, added storage, built a small workbench near the window. He learned to fix what broke instead of replacing it. When something failed, he didn't panic or complain. He studied it. He adapted. That mindset began to spill into everything else he did. Another micro hook of his journey appeared quietly. Confidence without noise. Back in the city, confidence had always been performative. It needed witnesses. It needed approval. In the mountains, confidence became internal. It showed up as calm decisions under pressure. As patience when plans went wrong. As the absence of urgency to explain himself. Elias stopped feeling the need to justify his choices. He no longer measured success by reactions. He measured it by alignment between intention and action. There were still hard days. Anyone who romanticizes this kind of life has never lived it. Equipment failed at the worst times. Injuries happened, minor, but frightening when you're hours from help. One afternoon, while hauling heavy timber, Elias slipped and twisted his ankle badly enough that walking became a slow, painful process. For days, progress halted. That's when the real test appeared. Not physical pain, but the fear of helplessness. In the city, injury meant calling someone, ordering something, paying for a solution. In the mountains, it meant adapting. Elias reorganized his days. He planned tasks that required less movement. He learned to sit still without spiraling into frustration. That injury taught him something he hadn't expected. Strength isn't constant motion. Sometimes it's restraint. Sometimes it's waiting without quitting. As seasons cycled, Elias started documenting his process, not to impress anyone, but to remember. Photos, notes, sketches. When he looked back at the earliest entries, he barely recognized the person who wrote them. That man was hungry for validation, terrified of failure, obsessed with outcomes. The man writing now was grounded, curious, patient. The mountains hadn't hardened him. They had clarified him. Visitors became more frequent over time. Friends, then friends of friends. Some stayed a night. Some stayed a week. Almost all left changed in small ways. They spoke more slowly. They listened more. They asked questions that weren't about productivity or money, but meaning. Elias noticed something interesting. People didn't come for the cabin. They came for permission. Permission to imagine a life shaped by intention instead of inertia. That's when the mocking fully transformed into something else entirely. The same people who once laughed now framed his story as brave, inspiring, even lucky. Elias found that word amusing. Luck implies randomness. What he'd done was deliberate, difficult, earned. But he didn't correct them. He understood something now that most people don't. People reframe stories to protect their comfort. Calling it luck allowed them to admire the result without questioning their own choices. Elias didn't preach. He didn't sell the lifestyle. He didn't pretend everyone should do what he did. He simply told the truth when asked. That the hardest part wasn't the building. It was staying when quitting would have been socially acceptable. That freedom isn't found in running away. It's found in standing still long enough to know who you are. Another winter came, harsher than the first. Snowfall was heavier. Storms more aggressive. But Elias was ready this time. The cabin held. Supplies were stocked. Systems refined. He wasn't reacting anymore. He was anticipating. That shift mirrored his internal state. Life stopped feeling like something happening to him and started feeling like something he was participating in. During one particularly violent storm, as wind battered the walls and snow pressed against the windows, Elias felt a calm that surprised him. Not numbness. Not bravado. Calm. He trusted his preparation. He trusted himself. That moment crystallized everything the journey had given him. Not toughness for its own sake, but trust. In his judgment. In his ability to endure uncertainty. When the storm passed, the cabin stood unchanged. But Elias didn't rush outside to celebrate. He sat quietly, letting the stillness settle. That restraint, choosing reflection over reaction, was the clearest sign of growth.